Hello and welcome to No Confidence. I'm your host, David Merlin. Nothing you'll hear me say is intended as legal advice. Anything that sounds like that to you, just consider something somebody else might do on a planet far, far away where the law matters. It doesn't matter here. I prove it on a daily basis. Believe it. It's July 21st, 2017. And today's show is a recording of an interview I just did on Lowell Becraft's radio show on LibertyWorksRadioNetwork.com. Great to be back on LWRN. Nice folks down there. And I urge you all to support LWRN. The interview, of course, is about income taxation, Lowell Becraft being probably the nation's number one authority on the historic efforts in Congress leading up to the enactment of income taxation statutes going all the way back to the 1890s. He's got an incredible database put together, and you know, he's out there debunking everybody. The entire anti-tax movement. Everybody that comes up with something, they want to hear what Lowell Becraft has to say about it, and he's spent a great deal of time and effort over the past, as far as I'm aware, 25 years plus, trying to keep people out of trouble that the Patriot movement seems hell-bent on getting them into. So he's out there looking at particular takes on the Internal Revenue Code, different spin on your relationship with government, be it municipal, state, or fed. And he's always done a bang-up job of representing arguments that just swift-boat the hell out of the vast majority of the popular claims emanating from the anti-tax movement. Well, here's an interview, my second interview with Lowell Becraft on his radio show. The other one was about 2.5 years ago, February of 2015, and a wonderful interview. This one is only 3 15-minute segments, so it's really a rush to cram in some meaningful content while at the same time staying on a level basic enough so that even a beginner in his audience can get the gist of really just one argument. We stayed pretty much on the topic of how to calculate your cost, relying only on the language of statute, Section 83 of the tax code, of course, and that really is the extent of the conversation today on this show. I hope you enjoyed the interview, and remember on TalkShoe here, 59615, there's an entire archive of calls. I appreciate your support.
Now live from coast to coast and around the globe, more real talk, the kind you want, on Liberty Works Radio Network.
And a great big welcome to all of you Liberty Works Radio listeners out there. This is Friday afternoon, and on Fridays, during the Truth Attack Hour, I'm your host. My name's Larry Becraft. I'm sitting here in my office in Huntsville, Alabama. And I want to tell you, maybe 18 months, maybe 2 years ago, I renamed this program the Hillary for Prison Hour. And, we like to talk about issues on this program that are, outside the norm, that are against the system. We bring this program to you for the purpose of education. Now, there's one thing that's real important in reference to education. One of the things I have seen over the years, we have this complicated Internal Revenue Code. And it results in a whole bunch of people surrendering a lot of property to the IRS every year. But, there are a bunch of Americans that are interested in digging into this document, a huge document. It would, if you shot it with a .45, it would probably stop the bullet. It's that thick. It's as thick as a brick. Well, my guest this afternoon is one of those oddities of America. He actually opened that book. I've known this guy for maybe 15 years. I know him to be a diligent student of the law. He has dug into the Internal Revenue Code. He speaks with authority. He's done a lot of research, and he is battling the system, particularly the IRS. His name is David Merlin. David, you with us?
Oh, yeah. Wouldn't miss it for the world.
Well, good. So you're out on the West Coast, and here it is. I'm in Huntsville, Alabama, which is North Alabama, where we get all the moisture, and it's probably 95 degrees outside. So here down in the South, if you fall down, it's kind of like you have a soft blow because all of that, falling into all that humidity is like falling into a bank of snow. So what's it like where you are now?
Well, actually, if you did a cities list on the web there to see who has the most rain and the least rain, Seattle really isn't that bad. It has a bad reputation, which a lot of people say it rains in Seattle. Sure, that's a few months of the year, but overall it's really very nice. And this week and next week, actually last week was pretty good too. So, 80, 83 degrees for a high.
Wow, nice. Real good really summertime weather. Well,
and
hey,
then you run into all these Democrats, and it just really tanks the impression you get from the weather.
Okay. Well, since you brought up Democrats, what do you have in mind?
For the purposes of this show, talking taxes, I'm heating it up.
Before we get around to taxes, I'm asking you a political question because you brought up a political topic, and you said Democrats, and it kind of sounded like it was a kind of a slur. So,
I'm on somebody else's radio program, or it would have sounded a lot worse. Believe me. Really, I voted straight Republican last time as a mission statement, and it's I really avoided politics like the plague. I was a high volume bartender here in Washington State, and you just couldn't beat me making $1,000 worth of drinks an hour. I was always, just right there. But and I liked people, and I really didn't get into politics. But this last president made it more necessary that I had to deviate from law, which was my main focus, and pick up politics to understand what the heck the guy was about. And he's pure politics, and I watch or listen to several hours of news and news talk every day, national, not local. And so, and this has been this way since 2000. I'm a news junkie, and to see politics on two different sides, and to really see now, better than I could ever tell in the past, the division between the two, the distance between Republican and Democrat is immense. And it really is cut along cultural lines first with me, that you follow the Democrats and you just find the entertainment industry doing a whole lot of things to childhood that we might not even ever recover. And it's terrible that kids grow up in a world they grow up in.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, hey, David, let's move from politics to the topic of the program. But before we go down that road, I think it would be beneficial for our listeners to know, how in the world did you get off into this topic? Because, there are not a whole lot of people that do it. As I said at the beginning of the program, that thing, the Internal Revenue Code, is thick as a book, and most people don't want to learn anything about it, and they rely upon people that support the system. So what motivated you?
Well, everybody listening should put down their glass of milk, because what I'm about to say just might cause anything you're drinking to come out your nose. It's so funny. In 1988, I was the world's fastest bartender, and the IRS came to my doorstep. First contact I had with government, really, beyond a traffic ticket, and I didn't like the way I was treated. And I scheduled a conference with Agent Marty Webb, who came to my door. She was probably 5'10", slender, short brown hair, and a trembling upper lip because I'm 6'3", and she didn't. And I answered the door, and I tower over her. So, and she's probably nervous out in the field, and I put her at ease, and called up and scheduled a meeting 3 weeks out. And a couple days before that, can't make it, let's reschedule. 3 weeks out. Right before that one, I called, can't make it, let's reschedule. 3 weeks out. I got another job, moved away, and started studying tax law. And it's older than all of us. You don't tick off your bartender.
Yeah,
and that's what they did. And here I am 29 and a half years later since that visit at my doorstep. And I've got 2 circuit tax appeals that are complete now. The exchange of briefs are complete. There are several provisions the government will not discuss, and those are the key to the argument that we're waging. And both of these will be going to the Supreme Court, because I've taught since the mid-'90s that don't litigate tax law unless you plan on going all the way to the Supreme Court, because nothing but dirty work below that level.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
You have to have a statute when you get to the
Now,
Supreme
hey,
Court.
David, let me stop you right here. Now, I want you to remember during several times, at the appropriate times during the course of this program, I want you to, we can't cover everything during the course of a program. And there might be somebody listening here that would like to delve into more information. By chance, would you have anything posted on the Internet?
Well, I thought you'd never ask. On wevgov.com, like Roe v. Wade, we v. gov, for we the people versus government, wevgov.com. It starts there. Read the homepage. I really like to see people pick up the law, because there's so many protections in it, you just wouldn't believe it. And pick up the law and review the conduct of public servants. And then click on Enter. You come into the website. There'll be a left-hand menu column, and there's several items there. You're going to look specifically at the federal income taxation page, and that has both of the arguments that I'm going to touch briefly upon during the show. But at the top of the menu column, there's a link that says YouTube 2. Click on that. It takes you to my YouTube channel. I just posted 2 videos 3 or 4 days ago. Vitally important. The first one is about criminal intent. There's a dozen videos there, but the 2 most recent, the first one is about criminal intent. It's part 3 of my criminal intent course right there on the web. It's a video screen capture. You just sit there and watch me as I navigate the contents of the folder as if you were on my computer. The most recent one is video segment number 7 from my 2003 seminars I did up here in Washington for a small group of students, where I explained tax code from the ground up, saying here's what you have, the statutory protections, and here's what they did to destroy those to turn a perfect tax code into the IRS. This is segment number 7. It's the last one in the group. You get the flash drive, and I start you slow with the basics, and I tell you what the government gives you. You're a citizen of the United States. The tax code applies. We all have to comply with it. Has to be clear language. Regulations can't deviate from statute, and I'm ready to analyze the tax code. And then I get into it in that video and picture 6 segments that lead up to the lesson plan for the 7th segment. And I have to tell you, I hadn't watched that video in about 12 years. I watched it the other day because I was going to post it on YouTube for the heck of it. And just the first 10 minutes of that video are so informative about the basics of the structure of the tax code regarding how taxes should be imposed if you followed statute. The first 10 minutes are dynamite. It's a 40-minute segment.
And all that's posted for anybody to watch on YouTube for free.
Yes.
Now, I want to digress a minute here. Let me ask you this. Do you make available on your website, some of the old laws and regulations?
Not old. I go strictly with the 1954 tax code plus amendment. It was the rewrite of the 1939 tax code.
Right.
And I only cite 5 provisions from the 39 code. Everything else is contemporary.
Okay. Well, now, for the benefit of our listeners, my website is the Dixieland Law Journal. You just get on the Internet. Don't use Google. Use Start Page or something like that and type in Becraft Briefs or Dixieland Law Journal. You can go over to my page. When you get there, there's I've reorganized it. There's a link to name taxation. That will take you over to another page, and if you look around there, you can find the old tax acts and regulations. So, while David's got information about the current code, if you want to know something about the old stuff, you can go get it on my website. Now, having said that, and we've educated our listeners a little bit about the background, I want you to tell me what is so blooming wrong with the income tax.
Well, let me tell you about something else the government gives you that is one of two things. It is either a curse or it is a blessing. You know, and I know, and probably most of your audience. And by the way, it's nice to be back on LWRN. Nobody could go wrong by supporting LWRN. The curse, okay, is 61A gross income. Everything you made, pal, when you received paycheck, that's gross income. Okay, and they club you willfully all the time with that statute. And so you know if the statute went against you, they'd be citing it all the time. And if they don't cite a statute, but at the same time it's something the government gives you in the form of Revenue Ruling 2007-19, Section 83A provides for the determination of what is to be included in gross income when you sell your labor. The government tells you.
Okay, now, hey, let's back up now. I think you're getting a little bit ahead of things here. We need to kind of lay a little bit of a foundation, so let me just stop right there. Back in the late 70s and early 80s, there was two guys, Pete Sondland and a guy by the name of Golden and Sondland. They came out with a book called Are You Required? And that was the first time there was exposed in this movement this idea that you have a basis in your labor. And income is really a gain. And thus, when you swap your labor for pay, work being paid for your work, and in essence, there's no gain and therefore no income. So, that was kind of an idea, that wages are not income that floated around back in the, about, at least up through the mid-'80s. Now, I would take it that your position is kind of an extension of that. Am I correct?
It's a statutory tie to those principles.
Ah, good. That's what we're going to get into. Hey, David, we got the music coming on, letting us know we got our first break. Hey, folks, we got two more segments. You need to have your attention on this program and listen. Stay tuned. And welcome back to the Hillary Progressive Hour. My guest this afternoon is David Meerland. He is from the West Coast. And I want to remind our listeners that his website is real simple. It is WeVGov, as in we the people versus the government. It's kind of short, WeVGov.com. A wealth of materials over there. And we're talking about a principle of law that's real important for taxation. We're talking about the subject of the tax, income. So, David, you have. I've learned this about you. You have a tendency to kind of, be succinct and kind of, draw conclusions real quick. And a lot of people can't follow you. So, can you take this kind of a step at a time and tell our listeners about your basic argument about Section 83 of Section 83 of the Internal Revenue Code? What does Section 83 deal with?
Of course, and I can make it very simple. I wrote a manual about Tax Code Section 83 in late 1993, early 94. In 2014, I added 30 pages to it to bring it up to speed and published it. Codebreaker, the Section 83 equation. I'm the only one in the known universes that teaches this. You can't get information about Section 83 and the average paycheck anywhere. I had a 33-year IRS enrolled agent who can represent people in tax court and at audits tell me that in 33 years of annual instruction and classes from the IRS, he never heard anything, not one iota about Tax Code Section 83, but the courts say it explains how to tax all compensation. It's a void in law. It's a forgotten paragraph. And so I don't have a choice. It applies to me. Let's start there. I have to know how to comply with it, because if you don't know how to comply, you make a mistake, you're making it under penalty of perjury, and who would love to just put you in prison? So I don't have a choice.
Let's stop right here. In the Internal Revenue Code, Section 61 deals with the definition of gross income. And, of course, that's where you start to ultimately reach into net income and taxable income. And it starts off with compensation for services, and it goes down a list of gains, profits from business, stuff like that. That's kind of a general list, and when you look at it, most people are going to sit there and say, well, gee, that's my paycheck. So what David is talking about is, exclusions from income. That's, Section 83 is, 22 numerically sections later, although there are not that many sections in between. But, he's dealing with this important topic of what is excluded from income.
Well,
so now that we know that we're in that area of exclusions for income, how in the world does Section 83 exclude, say, somebody's paycheck?
Right, and when you say Section 83, if we just forget the number, it's a rule. It's a law. Yeah. We have to comply with it. They gave it to me. If it screws me, I'm screwed. But if it protects me, I want those protections. And so we need to get our feet on the ground regarding a statute they say explains how to tax me. About Section 61A, general definition. It starts with except as otherwise provided. That's the burden of proof statute. It's the statute that puts the burden of proof on you. Everything's gross income unless you can prove something is otherwise provided. And that's all it is. They call it a general definition, but it starts by saying, except as otherwise provided. Well, that's not a definition at all. Plus, 61B says, for items specifically included in gross income, go to some subchapters, Section 71 through 90. Section 83 is in there, and the law, 61B, requires me to go there. And so I go there, and I find this case law that says it applies to all your compensation, explains how to tax it from 1974 right through 2011 on the appellate level. I've got case law scattered across America, and the government agrees. Everybody knows it. They won't talk about the language of Section 83 that doesn't say your whole paycheck is gross income. That's why I stuck there. When I first saw it, I said, if this applies to me, it's not being enforced. And I immediately went to the law library and dug up 70 or 80 cases, found a bunch that say, it explains how to tax your paycheck. And I says, okay, stop the car. And I've been there since 1993, and the government won't talk about it. And now I'm fully locked and loaded with Supreme Court case law about how to interpret every single word used in that statute. And they can't take it. So that's why it's a bone of contention. But it's language. They say the excess over the amount paid is gross income. It doesn't say that.
Hey, David, let me stop. Let's stop right here and back up a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay, we're talking about this exclusion from income. Can you put it to, before we get much deeper into the details, can you give a conceptual point that you want to make that kind of summarizes your Section 83 argument?
Okay, rules. We have statutes and we have regulations written to bring those statutes fully into force. And the regulations under Section 83, which says only the excess over the amount paid is gross income. Well, what's the amount paid? I need to identify that. Regulation says the amount paid is the value of any property that you paid for your paycheck. And the word any is all-inclusive. I got 5 Supreme Court cases and a ton of appellate cases since 2013 that back me up on that. So when I read the term any, I say labor's included in that because labor's property. It's your most sacred and inviolable property.
Oh, yeah. Supreme Court says that.
Okay, so now I have a rule that says all property is cost, but I got a policy that says not labor. Well, why? Where's your authority to exclude labor from the term any? And they'll penalize you for asking. They have to have a way out of that description of cost. Any property. It means all of it, and they can't come up with a law that allows them to exclude labor. It's a policy alone. And so on a policy that contradicts the law diametrically, it's the difference between having only gross income when you get paid or having none. And so
all right, so let me see if I can conceptually paint it for our listeners. You know, you and I can have a conversation, but we do have some people here that are, not students of the law. They do something else.
I was getting to the concept.
Okay.
They make an exception for labor, but the law does not. And here's the exception. On the left-hand side, you got an automobile. I bought that thing for $3,500 a year and a half ago. and I'm going to sell it. And on the right-hand side, I got a wheelbarrow full of my labor, and I'm going to sell it. When I sell my labor to my employer, they say, the labor didn't cost you anything. It was free, and you sold it, so everything you received was profit. But the car, when you sold it, you have a receipt. It did cost you something, but your labor was free to you before you sold it. And they make that distinction between whether or not it's property within which you have a cost, like the car I'm selling, or whether it's labor that was free to me. I didn't have to buy that before I sold it. That's their policy, and it's not founded upon law, when in fact cost is defined by law as any property.
All right.
And that's where it sticks.
David, let's shift the terms around a little bit here. There may be some accountants in our audience, and this might be another way to kind of to paint it. Let's say you bought the car. Let's say that you buy a car for $5,000. That is your basis. You hold it a week, and you sell it for $5,000. Now, the reason the $5,000 that comes in from the sale of the car results in no income is because you had a basis of $5,000.
Correct.
So you subtract the basis from what you got, and you have zeros. Now, if you sold the car after you held it for a week for $6,000, of that $6,000, you would subtract off the $5,000, which is the cost of the car to you, and then you have a, quote, profit. I'm not saying the profit's income, but you have a profit of $1,000. Now, when what you're saying is that since the Supreme Court said that our labor is property, it's the same thing as, it's no different from a car. In fact, it's better than a car. You know, so it's the highest form of property that the Constitution recognizes.
But it lacks one characteristic, and that's the characteristic they seize upon as justification to say we're going to tax your labor as if it was profit. And it's that one little characteristic. They have to have a law that allows it, because over here is a law that says any property is cost. Where's your authority to exclude labor from that? And they'll stone you for asking.
So I see this trick that they're pulling. They're considering compensation for services to be indistinguishable from a different concept recognized by the IRS, which is known as compensation for labor. Even though the IRS recognizes a thing that's different from compensation for services, known as compensation for labor, they're pretending like compensation for labor doesn't exist, and they're treating it as compensation for services. Is that right?
No, it's simply the fact that the services you sold, you didn't have to purchase before you sold them. Whereas other property, you had to purchase it first, and you get a deduction for that tangible cost that you have in that. But you have no cost in your labor. You got up in the morning, and you had it with you. It was free. And that's the distinction.
But David, there's another IRS principle at issue here. If you don't know the basis of some property, then that basis is going to be what it will command in the fair market.
True, but they say, I know the basis of labor, citizen Brett, it's zero. You didn't have to buy your labor, and so we already know the basis. We don't have to figure it. The basis is zero. And that's the distinction, is because you didn't have to buy your labor first. It's the only way. It's a policy, and it is extortion and racketeering. It is not founded upon law. The law says any money or property is a cost. And I got a freebie for your audience, wevgov.com/ you're going to love this. All lowercase, no spaces, wevgov.com/ IRS17.pdf. IRS17.pdf. That's the cover page of Publication 17 and the interior page for each of 23 consecutive years where the IRS is telling you your services are your cost. Oops. Enjoy.
Okay, but hey, David, you during the course of this program, you made a comment that some IRS agent said he'd never learned anything about Section 83. But that's standard fare. The only thing that the IRS agents know, they go to these classes, and all they study are IRS publications. They don't study the code.
I said IRS enrolled agent. He's a private accountant that can represent you at audits or in tax court. He's not an IRS agent.
Well, that may be the case, but I was just making the comment, you were observing that the IRS maintains its position, like there was this implication that they're actually looking at the law, which is not the case. The IRS agents only go to these classes. They learn what the teacher is teaching, which is from IRS manuals.
Sure, and I study the law because that's what's going to matter when you get to court. It trumps everything. I got Congress right behind me.
So you've developed this argument over the years. Is there anything more that you can tell us about the substance of it, or is there more details to it?
On wevgov.com, on the federal income taxation page, there are two arguments sketched. The bottom third of the page is about Section 83. When you click on YouTube 2 at the top of the menu column, at my YouTube channel, take these two tutorials. Very important. One is called Key to the Code, and the other one is the Section 83 tutorial. It's 2.5 hours long. Take those two tutorials. They're about the two arguments that are sketched on that on the federal income taxation page of the website. And this is free, and I'll show you two particular arguments and all the statutes that comprise the reasons for my conclusions, and you're going to say, you're right. Social Security has never been written to apply to citizens of the United States, which leaves only Chapter 1 of the tax code, and there is no citizen named as a subject, so they wrote a regulation.
Yeah, well, hey, hold on, David. We got the music in the background letting us know we got a break. Hey, folks, we got another 15-minute segment with David. You need to listen and know this information, so stay tuned. And welcome back to this final segment of the Hillary for Prison Hour on this hot July Friday afternoon. My guest is David Maryland. We're talking about something that most people they're simply not aware of. They've never been introduced to these concepts. To think that what you get paid when you work may very well not be income according to the law. And what David is talking about is that there is a law inside the Internal Revenue Code, a section that deals with, when you sell something that, constitutes gross receipts, you get to subtract, your cost of goods sold from that to determine what your profit is and your income. And David's position is that, hey, the same thing happens here with labor. So he's got a website. It's a real lengthy subject to talk about during the course of a program. He makes a lot of material available, including videos over on his website. And I invite all of our listeners to go over there and spend the time, because this is an extremely important topic. It has constitutional significance. Would you agree with that, David? It has constitutional significance.
Larry, bless your heart. And, oh, yes, I've known two women that died from stress caused by tax controversies.
Oh, yeah.
Dick Simkinen, people die. And you have an entire anti-tax movement out there that's just frivolous to extremes and willing to take your money when they know what they do lands people in prison. And that's the constitutional rub right there. There's a lot of good, innocent Americans in prison that got talked into a certain game plan by somebody that said they knew what they were talking about. And I have to tell you, folks, if somebody tells you they know what the tax code says and they're not diagramming the tax code the way I do in that latest video on my YouTube channel, you're going to see how much they're probably missing. Listen, when you look at that video and see what I'm able to tell you just about income taxation, that's one view of my teaching about that particular aspect of law and how they have to know. They know all about it. Now, you meet people from time to time on a certain topic who might just be head and shoulders above the other people you've heard, and you can tell they're painting a bigger picture, like somebody that knows more about world politics than the last president. You can spot the difference, okay? When you look at what I'm teaching. It's one thing to observe the findings of my conclusion, let that sink in, and then take a step back and look again and ask yourself, what is my relationship with the federal government? That's the big picture here, is you have the same relationship with the federal government that you have with the person that would run up to your car with a crowbar and take it at a traffic light. So that's what comes out of all this. And I'm not back saying I'm going to gripe about the IRS. I'm telling you, this has been decades of extortion accomplished through a code they won't talk about now that somebody knows exactly what statutes to argue. And that's the fight I'm waging on both of these circuits and in a couple other venues around the country right now. That's the big one.
It is, and you talked about people that have harmed themselves. I know a lady that hung herself on the morning of trial.
One lady I knew, 1993, Christine York, rest in peace. Her digestive tract went into paralysis, and 30 days later, with no digestive movement of any type, on a gurney at the University of Washington Medical Center, undiagnosed, had a massive stroke that killed her. 2013, Sandra Cote, rest in peace.
That's who I was talking about.
Tax evasion trial, and her heart exploded. This is serious. And all I do is try to keep people out of prison. I could give people their money back. 2.5 years later, you'll be leaned and levied into poverty with penalties and interest. Why would I do that to you? I would be in the tax movement if I did that. That's what they do. And I'm out here going, there's one more moron I got to clean up afterward when they get out of prison and they want to vacate their conviction. Yeah, I got arguments, but man, I don't want to jump in the sewer and litigate against government for a living. It's the worst place to be in America.
Yeah, no kidding. Hey, but David, you've addressed some of the same problems I have, and I think that for the rest of the program, we've given the audience enough time to learn that a lot more information is over on your website. You're talking about these problems you encounter in the movement, and I encounter them all the time. And there are these people out there that are, selling trash.
Man, I got a collection of indictments, from the tax movement. I got a folder full of PDF downloads of people's indictments, and you show these to people you tell them, don't do this redemption garbage over here, or don't file liens against
That's what I'm talking about. It's starting all over this week. Have you seen that?
Yeah, and later on, you find out they're one of the ones who got swept up, and you tried your best to keep them from doing that. It's paying the government what it demands is worth it, because when you got a permanent relationship with the IRS, you got half of a life. Why would you do that? For just a few $100s, look at that price you pay at the end of the year as your price of admission to a shouting match with your congressman. It's the best you can do if you don't know how to write litigation like I do. I just completed 2 appeals. I'm going to do another. I had 2 people come out of tax court. I wrote for them. There's a U.S. District Court civil action that the U.S. brought. I'm handling the counterclaim. And all he's suing for is clear explanation of the laws that they promised in the Taxpayers' Bill of Rights. And the government's arguing, saying, and they're quoting Sixth Circuit case law. It says you don't have a right to clear explanation of the laws. Spare me.
Whoa. What are you talking about?
No. And I got
court said you don't have you're not entitled.
And
run that by me again.
Yeah, Helbering, and I will. Helbering versus Texpan Oil Company, 1937. Supreme Court says the taxpayer is entitled to know the basis in law and fact upon which the commissioner sought to sustain the deficiency. The Taxpayers' Bill of Rights says you can have clear explanations, and the Sixth Circuit case law says the commissioner has no duty to explain the law to you. Another one says you aren't entitled to clear explanation of laws. I'm reading those. I feel like my arms are being chopped off, right? And then, so in the reply brief, I wrote, it was a motion to dismiss his counterclaim, and I wrote, Sixth Circuit, is that the same Sixth Circuit that held it was legal for judges to rape women in their chamber? See U.S. versus David Lanier, that case from the Supreme Court in 1997, where the Supreme Court had to correct the Sixth Circuit that let him off of the charges. Anyway, so we're duking it out over this. Can I just get an explanation or what? There's like 10 provisions they won't talk about, and those are the ones going to the Supreme Court. So I'm making just as big a mess as you can make using tax law only. and they can't take it now that somebody knows just what buttons to push.
Well, hey, David, what's your assessment of where you've been involved in the tax movement for a long period of time? What do you observe about its effectiveness?
The opposite of effectiveness. They have gone nowhere. Now at least when I first met people in the movement, 1991, maybe 1990, at least they had their head in statute, and they wanted to know what certain tax code provisions were about. And now everybody just thumbs their nose, saying I'm a sovereign citizen type of moron.
Right.
You can't teach them anything, and they got this sui juris to the third power mindset, and you can't even reach them with black and white. So I'm a code creator.
Would you agree with this statement that once somebody has gotten into that trash, that becomes their permanent mindset, and they become completely useless to any movement to improve the condition of the American people?
They've become useless to their own children. They don't have any political power whatsoever, and they aren't acquainted with anything that will change the system. And so they have taken themselves out of the loop regarding whether or not you have a say in running your own country.
What's your solution? What do we need to do?
I'm on government like a stink. You're going to see a book on my website, weebegov.com, a book called No Confidence, Civil Liberties versus Homeland Security. There's over 110 proposed citizens' initiatives I've written. I would see a problem, and I'd write a law to cure it. I'd see another problem, I'd write a law to cure it. And you're going to see how many different places in government I've observed problems and written laws to cure it, prohibiting facial recognition software, prohibiting regulating rap as if it was pornography. Just a litany. I've also got more than 10, maybe a dozen proposed constitutional amendments. And with Republicans everywhere now in state houses and senates, now's the time to really go for conservative constitutional amendments, not necessarily a con, but at least get a couple in there to fortify the Fourth Amendment against unreasonable seizures, bring some recent Supreme Court standards. They don't understand the Second Amendment. They still want to mess with it, so write a fortification and make it an amendment to the Constitution to support the Second Amendment the way we want it read. Just a lot of slack. And the Commerce Clause, they've just killed us with compromises of the Commerce Clause. Go back to Gibbons versus Ogden on the Commerce Clause, like 1830s, and they spell it out right there. If it doesn't cross a state line, the Fed has no jurisdiction. Just really basics. Get the book on citizens' initiatives. I got a manual on Section 83. There's my complaint that went to 80 members of Congress New Year's of 06. That's called Take from Caesar, Volume 1. A bunch of stuff. Of course, is on flash drive. If you want to be mean to municipalities using just what's in the box, called American Jurisprudence, get my drive-by litigation course. It's as mean as I can be to the bean counters in a municipality when they commit a tort. Have everybody fighting each other while I just walk away from the complaints I file. Anyway, fun stuff.
Well, David, years ago, you could have a meeting where 800 and 1,000 people would show up. And it seems like since the 2000s, when the government came along and attacked certain leaders in the tax movement, and then they've done the same thing with the gurus like Ken Hunter and Dr. Kennedy and Tim Turner. It seems like right now there's a kind of a malaise that has set in, and people don't know what to do. How do we address that problem?
And Sherry Jackson, they made the route, and they don't talk to me about taxes. They know I'm writing in all these different criminal cases that I write in, and these civil actions I have going up to the Supreme Court, and they know the juncture comes at every time when they file an opposing brief and it's my turn to reply. They have to sit there and wait for me to come along and humiliate them about the fact the biggest, baddest attorneys in the world, biggest legal department, they can't talk about these 5 provisions, and I list them right there. And it's pretty sad, and they don't bug me. So
but what I want to know is, do you have some at least in your soul, some possibility that the American people can rise to the occasion and correct some of these great antisocial problems that are caused by the federal government?
If you look at the baseline level where I begin to teach, it's about the basics where the law means what it says. And you can count on it because it's the legislature. You elected them. When you find compromise, you look toward the executive branch. They're doing something wrong. It's always a crime when they do it. Learn the criminal code. I didn't get any respect till I started writing and filing citizens' criminal complaints. It's not tough. And I got a course on how to do it. So, and documents in Microsoft Word, so your documents will look great. So you can start your learning curve. Education, case law is free. You can't read too much case law. What I know, I learned from judges. I'm citing high court cases constantly. It's what I do, incessantly. And I hope people will pick this up, but look what I'm doing on my own. It's obvious that I'm not counting on others. What I'm hoping to do with these two appellate cases, they're civil, and I hope to get a ruling that will help. I'm certainly getting replies from the government that help later.
Hey, David, we're going to have you back, but the end of the program has arrived. As always, you're a great guest, and I want to have you back, okay? And have a great weekend.
Take care.
Well, that was wonderful. As I stated, Lowell Becraft has devoted a great deal of time and effort to disproving the vast majority of conclusions that emanate from the anti-tax movement and gain prominence among its aficionados and followers and participants, whatever you want to call them. Yet here, I seem to have piqued Lowell Becraft's interest, to say the least, and I want to tell you, I've been watching for a long time, and you just don't get a positive comment out of Lowell Becraft about anything you have to say about the law. If you're a self-taught paralegal such as myself, there are a bunch of people out there that claim to know what they're talking about when it comes to law. They make a great deal of noise. They have beautiful websites, obviously spend a bunch of money on their websites, and occasionally they go out and speak, and end result oftentimes is just a lot of people get in trouble. And yet here Lowell Becraft seems to say, go out and look at what I'm teaching. I hope that sinks in for a few people out there that hear this presentation, that he claims that he's known of my work for a long time. It's taken him that long to comment one way or the other on my conclusions, and he's picked one which happens to be his specialty. Historically, there's nobody that can come close to Lowell Becraft as it relates to studying the topic of what is and is not gross income, the impetus behind the 16th Amendment, and now we see really there's embedded in the law a standard for calculating costs that the government's been ignoring ab initio, and it is the difference between having everything included in gross income when you receive compensation for your services and nothing being included in gross income when you receive compensation. It's the entire difference, whether or not all property is a cost. And you heard me orient the argument on contemporary statutes and regulations. So to have this from Lowell Becraft, I'm very encouraged by it, and I want to thank him for the opportunity to appear on his show. And I hope everybody appreciates the really the affordable price structure built into my product line. You'll see at wevgov.com. Thanks again for joining me here at No Confidence. You could have been doing a lot of other things, and I certainly appreciate you tuning into the show. Download the archive here, and you'll also hear me on TalkShoe, caller ID 87488. That's American Liberties with Chris Chapman, 87488. And I'll see you on the next episode.
I say good show.